It's 10 miles north of Lusk as the crow flies. I'm very proud of my heritage, and it started way back in 1818 in England. My great-great-grandfather was Squire Hamilton Wilson, and he spelled different than your Wilson. It only has one L. And I have no information because I've not followed up on it. These are only my great-grandmother's notes and things that she left. But I don't know when he came to the United States, but they claimed that they were among, they had descendants that were among the early pilgrims. He had 7 kids, or 8 kids, and the family Bible shows no birthplace for the first 4 children. The 5th child was my great-grandfather, Marcellus Hamilton Wilson. He was one of 8 brothers and sisters, and he was born in Hendricks County, Indiana in 1848. He had very little schooling, but was strictly raised in church and home duties. He was known for his honesty and uprightness in all his dealings. He was a silent man who did his duty as he saw fit, and those came from his obituary. Squire Hamilton, Marcellus, my great-grandfather, married Minerva Cornelius Mars in 1874. And they were married in 1836. And my great-grandmother was born in Jasper, Iowa in 1854, after her father, who was a doctor, died in the black cholera epidemic in Indiana. Her mother died 4 years later of pulmonary tuberculosis, and she was raised by one of her uncles, who also happened to marry into my great-grandfather's family. So not only was she raised as a member of a family, but she was raised into which the family was also where she later married. Marcellus and Minerva were married in 1874, and they farmed with his father in Indiana, which was close to Iowa. Great-grandfather purchased a sawmill, and he cut logs and lumber and took them to the nearby town of Newton, and I'm assuming that's Newton, Iowa, but I don't know that for sure. In 1888, they started their trek west with the sawmill and 4 children, the oldest being 16 and the youngest being 2 years old. They utilized the sawmill across, as they came across the country. They took their time, as is evident, because it took them till 1896 to arrive in Niobrara County. Their future son-in-law, Ed Daly, had homesteaded where our ranch currently is, and he had just filed the homestead papers. My great-grandfather talked him into selling him that homestead, and then Edward Daly married my great-aunt in 1897, and they homesteaded the Petts place, which is further to the north. My grandfather was the 3rd of the 4 children, and he and my great uncle Frank worked with their father on the homestead. They also filed contiguous homesteads to his land, and My Uncle Frank was a devout bachelor until my great-grandmother passed away, and 5 months later he got married. And he married Mary Swain Wills from the Douglas area, and that is a very critical bit of history in our line of running the ranch. My grandfather, he left the ranch in 1923 and moved to various jobs around Wyoming, and he deeded his homestead to his father. My mother was born in 1916, December 1st, 1916, on a place that was homesteaded by my grandmother. And it was just west or just north of Jenny Lenz's turnoff before you get to Zumbrunnens, and you look off to the west and the house is still standing there. My mother was born December 1st, 1916, and the story is that my grandfather had to take the sleigh to town, bring the sleigh to town to get the doctor, and he never had to open a gate because there was so much snow it covered all the fences. Going back to my great grandparents, they raised a lot of horses. They continued to do the sawmill here in Niobrara County, and they built a lot of barns and sheds and things for other homesteaders. But he was also very good at raising horses, and he must have had very good stock because my great-grandmother's diaries indicate that neighbors were always bringing their mares to be bred. My great-grandfather planted an orchard. It had apple trees, had a pear tree, had a peach tree, and some of those trees are still standing today at the ranch. They built a substantial 2-story house and many outbuildings. And in World War I, they broke and delivered horses to Fort Robinson for the Army. I do have my great-grandmother's diaries. They're all written in pencil, and so they have started to fade. And so I have transcribed almost all of them where I can read them. And it was interesting to read about the lives. I mean, they'd only lived 10 miles from Lusk, but rain or shine or snowstorm, they seemed to be coming to Lusk all the time. I mean, it was amazing how often they came in here to deliver eggs and milk to the town. One of the things that she wrote about that specifically stuck in my mind was my great uncle Frank and my great grandmother loaded up a wagon, and it was pulled by a horse that my great uncle Frank had broken the day before. Well, the end result was the wagon didn't get home. It ended up in a canyon. She never talked about injuries or anything like that, but I can just imagine Leslie bailed off of the wagon. What an experience that must have been. My mother was the fourth of Raymond and Iva's children, and she married Albert Ruffing in 1936, and my dad was born and raised at 30 miles north of here, Christian and Gertrude Ruffing, and Britt Moen now lives on it. My dad was one of 9 children, and when my grandfather passed away, they were unable to hold on to it, and so it has sold, and it has exchanged hands quite a few times. It is directly across to the entrance to Henry Wasserberger's place, which, by the way, my grandmother, my dad's mother, and Henry's grandmother were sisters. So I'm related to the Wasserbergers too. My mom and dad came to the ranch. They bought it from Mary Wills, who had been married to my great uncle Frank, and they came to the ranch in 1948 and purchased it in 1949, and lived on the ranch until their deaths in 1982 and 1998, respectively. My dad always worked at another job. He worked either for the city or the county or the state of Wyoming. And so the ranching was his part-time, full-time job. He did it in the mornings, he did it at night, he did it on weekends. He had no other hobbies but the ranch. My mother also worked out. She worked at the laundry, she worked at the hospital, she worked for Montgomery Ward, she worked at the diner. And they both retired in 1981, and then my dad developed cancer and passed away 13 months later in 1982. I know that it was because of my mom and dad that we had such strong work. My brother and I have such strong work ethics. We have a passion for what we do. And we were expected to work alongside them, and we had to go home right after school every night, and we had our chores. In the summertime, my brother and I put up the hay because my mom and dad were out working the jobs that paid for the ranch. My brother Bob reluctantly left the ranch shortly after graduating in 1961, and because the ranch wasn't big enough to support two families. He started a career path with Marathon Oil and did very, very well with his high school education. And he is now consults for various companies, and the latest one that he's consulting with is Kinder Morgan on pipelines and oil tanks. Myself, I graduated from high school in 1964, and with honor scholarships to the University of Wyoming. Unfortunately, that wasn't my notch in life. I went to Parks Business School and in Denver, and realized that business and bookkeeping and accounting were the things that I liked to do. I got married in 1969 and moved to Las Vegas, and I worked for an attorney and who was also involved in politics, so I kind of got my start in politics on that end of it. My husband and I moved back to Laramie in 1972, and I worked at the University of Wyoming in various capacities, the last being assistant to the Dean of the College of Commerce and Industry. I did work for Jerry Holland when he was with the UW Foundation. He was a great boss to work for. And I divorced in 1977 and continued to work at the university. I returned to the ranch in 1982 when my dad passed away because my mom wanted to keep the ranch, but she didn't know how to manage the ranch. And I had spent weekends and vacations and everything with Mom and Dad. And my dad was the typical chauvinist. I could be the gopher, but I couldn't really do the hard work. That was not, I could ride horseback. I couldn't set a steel post, or I couldn't dig a post hole. Those were things that he did, so I stood and watched him, and I ran and got all the materials and stuff like that. But I told my mom when I came back to the ranch that we would attempt it. My mom and dad's hard work really paid off. Everything was paid for and free and clear when they retired in 1981. They owed no one a dime. And I did not want to jeopardize that. And I didn't know if I could do it. But I did, and 16 years later, we were still operating the ranch. It was a success. But I had a lot of help. I had neighbors. I traded day work to go help them, and they helped me. I got a lot of advice from experienced ranchers, Jack Larson, Jim Kramers, Ernie Hansen, and I couldn't have done it by myself. My brother, who hadn't been on the ranch since '61, all operations had changed, and in fact, I changed a lot of operations from the way my dad did it. But when Bob would come home on his vacations, I always had my list of things for him to do that I couldn't do. It's probably my other boss.
Is that for you?
Let's see, my mom and I really did make a success. We built fences and to make the pastures more manageable. We drilled a well. We built 2 barns. We built corrals that we could. And I say we. I did. My mom and I did. It was very hard work. I fed all my livestock. I calved all my livestock out. When I had help, was at brandings, the Kramer boys and the neighbors, branding and at shipping time. But basically the rest of the time I was doing it all myself. I was appointed to the hospital board in 1988, and I was one of the individuals instrumental in getting our hospital district. In 1993, I was elected to county commissioner, and I served 11 of the 12 years as chairman of the county commissioners, and I loved that, in addition to doing what I was doing on the ranch. And we sold our cows in 97, and my mom passed away in 98. I sold the remaining cows in 1988, or yearlings in 88, and I've been taking in cattle, summer pasture, since then. Until 2009, I continued to maintain all the fences, and health has prevented me from doing that. So now, Tracy Mankey, in exchange for doing all the work, he has some pasture land where he runs a few cows, but he does magnificent work in maintaining and taking care of the ranch for my brother and I. Danny Hansen brings in cattle in the summer on the rest of the land. I took my Social Security in 2007, planning to retire and become play a lot of golf, and that hasn't happened. I find myself sometimes with 4 part-time jobs, and I work over 40 hours a week because I can't say no, because I like what I do. Things have, in 2005, YDOT opened a gravel pit on the land, and, which we have the mineral rights, and it was very beneficial. We've been able to rebuild a lot of our outside fences and do some things that before they were maintained, but they weren't in the best of quality. As for the future, we don't know. My brother Bob married Judy Pate here in Lusk in 1965, and they have my mom and dad put the ranch into it and all of their belongings into a trust on September 9th of 1982, and my dad died 10 days later. everything was taken care of. When my mom passed away, I became the trustee, and my brother and I are co-beneficiaries of the trust. We have no intention of selling the ranch. That is our goal. We don't know what the goal is going to be for my brother's children or his grandchildren. We had hoped that his son Brian, when he retired from the Forest Service and wildland firefighting, that he would come home to the ranch. But he did come home, but not in that way. We just scattered his ashes. So we don't know what that future is going to be for the ranch. But I hope it stays in the family. I do. I'm very proud of it. It's family means a lot. And I hope that you found this informative. I have my great-grandmother's china closet and some of her other furniture. And in 1961, the original farmhouse was flooded when we had 8 inches of rain in less than an hour. And it's just over the divide, and nobody else around us got that much rain. And that house had been there. It was they homesteaded in 1897. And this was 1956 when the flood hit. It had never happened. It washed out buildings, but it went through the house. It never took the house down. And that was quite an ordeal. I was 11 years old and my dad was dragging me through the water that was up to my neck. And we lived in that house from 56 to 61, and they built a new house. The great-grandmother's china closet was full of dishes. The water kicked it up, and when the water receded, it placed it face down. No glass was broke. No dish was broken. It did damage to the wood, but it didn't do any damage to that, even though my brother was walking on top of it because it was the only thing sticking out of the mud. And my mother says, "For God's sake, get off of the china closet." And my dad says, "Oh, hell with the china closet. We have more things to worry about than that." And that's true. It was, it was kind of interesting going back through this, and I didn't take the time, but it made me think, I need to go back now that genealogy is so much easier to follow, and go back and see if I can find out where my great-grandfather was born in England, and when he came to the United States. I don't know that. Most of this stuff was put together by my great-grandmother in 1934 before she passed away. So nobody's done anything with it since then. So that's kind of sad. So, thank you very much for listening. You've been very good.
And I don't know where a good place would be. There aren't any areas that are really big enough to hold everybody. I'm going to go in here, and if you're interested in hearing about the old cult, you can come in there, and we can even put the overflow in the bathroom. Some people out here, and we'll get by. So I'm going to start here in about a minute. Okay. Better go get the pistol. Where'd I put it? Well, let me go ahead. How many of you have heard the old West saying, "God made men, but Sam Colt made them equal"? There might be a little bit of truth to that. Then again, I don't know, a lot of the outlaws use these things too, so it worked both ways. But anyway, I'll make this pretty brief, but it's a neat thing that we received, and I have it right here, and you're welcome to handle it if you're careful and promise not to drop it. Okay? Well, let me tell you the story from the beginning. About a year ago, we got a letter from a gentleman in Oklahoma named Homer. can't remember his first name. I got his letter on file in there. But anyway, Mr. Homer said, my grandfather was a driver, and he worked for the Cheyenne Deadwood stage line. And we have his Colt revolver, his gun belt, what's left of it, his holster, which I left upstairs because I couldn't carry it, I didn't have enough hands, and his whip handle, which has long since lost its whip. He said, the old gun is 4440 black powder Colt revolver. He carried it. Would you like to have it? What did I say? So, needless to say, we have it. He gave it to us. It was a gift to the museum. And I had a lot of fun figuring out how to display it. And if you get a chance, go upstairs, because as soon as I'm through here, I didn't mean to point it at you. As soon as I get finished here, we'll put it back in the case. But anyway, so we found out a little bit about Joe. This is Joe as a young man. Joe came to this country and became an employee of the stage line. And best I can tell, by looking in this book, which you might be interested in if you'd like to read about the Cheyenne Deadwood stage line, the best I can tell is he was a teamster. He took care of stock. He drove wagons back and forth between the stage line, or between stage stations like Running Water and the Rawhide Buttes and some of those up north. And he would carry supplies for the different stage stations, horseshoes, whatever, I don't know. But we never did learn much about him, except what his grandson wrote in this letter. So let me read that. It's very short. And it tells the story of Joe Homer, who carried this 1882 single action Colt around with him. And God only knows if it ever shot somebody. I'm sure it has some stories. Anyway, this is what Mr. Homer told us. So we just copied it word for word and put it in the display. It says, Joseph Harvey Homer was born in Knox County, Illinois, 24 November 1859. When he was 2 years old, following the death of his grandfather, the family moved back to the farm in western Pennsylvania near Greenville. As a young man, after completing his enlistment in the Pennsylvania National Guard, Joe came to Wyoming Territory. Here he tried his hand at prospecting for gold, worked as a teamster for the Cheyenne and Black Hills Stage Company, and also homesteaded 160 acres 1 mile south of Lusk, near the properties of Pfister and Sturman. And I haven't checked that out very carefully, but I'd like to sometime over the courthouse. It's out somewhere connected to what was known as the Pfister Farm out east of town here that was sold a few years ago. John Sturman?
And John Sturman's place.
Anyway, in the early 1890s, he returned to Greenville to take over the family farm and orchard. After his father had been incapacitated in an accident. In 1893, he married Sarah Henry, and they had 3 children. Joe returned to the Lusk area several times for extended visits with his friends, the last time being the spring and summer of 1927. His home remained in Pennsylvania. He died May 19, 1933 at the age of 73 and is buried in the Shenango Valley Cemetery, Greenville, Pennsylvania. The gun, holster, and whip handle were Joe Homer's from his time in Wyoming. The gun's a black powder model, single action 1873 Colt Frontier 6-shooter, caliber 4440. He said made in 1877. I found out later from Colt it was made in 1882. And I hope that they could tell us more, like where it was delivered and so on. I don't know whether Joe bought it in Cheyenne and he got off the train to come up here, or whether he had it, carried it on the way out, who knows. But it was made in 1882. The gun's currently inoperable. Joe Homer's grandson, John T. Homer, Stillwater, Oklahoma, come out of this history. So that's the story of Joe Homer. And like I say, if anybody wants to check it out, you're welcome to do so. I put together a few simple dates. I kind of planned to be up by the stage to do this, and I anticipated that somebody might have some questions about the stage line. So I just looked up and jotted down the basic dates in case you're not familiar with them. As you know, the stage line ran right through here, and if you go out to George Lathrop, the famous driver's grave out west of town, it came across the highway right there on that spot. In fact, if you go up by his grave and look out to the south, you can see ruts. And it went through the golf course, and Running Water Station is out there by the prison. It's kind of hard to get to, but there's a foundation remaining. And if you're familiar with the story of the stage route, I won't get into all that because that's a long, long story. But I did write down some dates to give you a little perspective on it. 1868, we had a treaty with the Sioux and the Cheyennes in Fort Laramie. I mean, and we agreed not to touch that land they called the Black Hills, and most of northern Nebraska and eastern Wyoming and Montana. Of course, that was 1868. What that is. But then in 1874, Mr. George Armstrong Custer and his expeditionary group discovered gold up there. Actually, gold had been discovered there earlier. That's another story. This was the first time it really became known to the people of this country and first brought on the big gold rush. Well, 1876, the trail was opened by an outfit called Yates and Company, and a month after they opened the first run to the Black Hills from Cheyenne, they hired a guy named, they sold it to another company, Salisbury and Patrick, and they immediately hired a guy named Luke Voorhees to be the superintendent. You might have heard of him. He had a ranch out out south, and he also had a ranch east of Lusk. He was a big cattleman, and he became the superintendent and part owner. Later on, in 1883, he sold his interest to Russell Thorpe, a more familiar name. And then in the summer of 1886, the railroad came through. And of course, that was the end of the stage, at least from Cheyenne to here. There were some other short lines operating sometime after that. In February 1887, February 19th, George Lathrop, the best-known driver who was laid to rest out here west of town, made the last run from Cheyenne to Lusk and to Deadwood. And in this book called The Cheyenne and Black Hills State and Express Routes, toward the back, well, there's pictures of George Lathrop, there's all kinds of neat photos, and there is an actual photo of the stage leaving Cheyenne. So if you've never seen this book, it's in the library. We have a copy here. You're welcome to come in and read. And that's basically, like I said, I don't really know much about the man who owned this gun. I wish I knew more. But check it out if you'd like. That's the end of my story. And incidentally, I found a book the other day down in Cheyenne that some of you might be interested in. It's a brand new book by a very well-known Western author, Richard D. Arment. It's called Assault on the Deadwood Stage. And he tells some really great stories about all the robberies and all the things that went on involving the famous stage run. So,
Can you tell me, where is this grave over here?
I'm sorry?
Where is the grave?
The grave is, when you go out on, what is it, 26? 20, I mean. It's 2 miles east or west of town. There's
Where the road goes almost as far as the road up to the country.
It's in the rest stop.
Yeah.
If you go to that rest stop and stop and get out, you'll see his grave toward the west end. They moved him. He was originally buried in I don't know, I think Manville. And in the 30s, not Luke 40s, but it was the 40s. And a lot of his buddies got together and they collected a lot of money and they built a monument out there. This was quite a thing. And he was considered by most people to be the best driver, and he was involved in a lot of wild things, robberies and this and that. But anyway, I started looking through this. I haven't had a chance to read it, but there's a lot of neat stuff in here. And so that's all for me. I think Ed Cook is going to go next and tell you a lot more interesting story about his grandfather's shotgun. And here's Ed. I don't know if we probably ought to, let me go around and announce it.
Yeah.
And
When it started, of course, it was to take freight and people from Cheyenne to Deadwood because of the gold rush. But to put things in perspective, there was not a town between Sundance and Cheyenne, not one. All there was a handful of state stations, and most of them were on the south side of the Platte River, because this area had just been opened up for a couple of years. And so the new state stations were up here, and but they were the only way to get people and freight. When you set up a stage line, you had to set up a freight line too, just to keep your stage stations working, because it was quite an organization. The summer of 1877 was a big bad time for holdups on the stage line. Now the freight company the year before had hauled 44 million pounds of freight from Cheyenne to the Black Hills, and the stage line, I forget the number on their total number on their passengers, but equally as impressive. They were busy all the time. I want to give you just a little bit of history about a couple people. Malcolm Campbell wrote a good story here. I'm going to read it to you in a few minutes. But he was the first sheriff in this area. See, this used to be Laramie County, all the way from Colorado to Montana. And then they made Converse County. That included all Niobrara County and what's Converse County now. But Malcolm Campbell was the first sheriff in there, and one of these stories is his. My grandfather comes into the story here a little bit later. His family had a livery stable. Some of you old timers might know what a livery stable is, but it was the Flying J of today. You know, they had all kinds of wagons and buggies and anything you could pull with a horse, and they had all kinds of horses for rent. So it was the main hub of town. And he grew up running that with his family, so he knew all kinds of horses and all kinds of hitches. And at 14, he decided to go west and be part of the West with his family's blessings. He ended up at Rawhide Buttes as a stock tender. And a few days later, the driver coming in from Cheyenne, let me see, it'd be probably Fort Laramie would be the next stop. There's one stop in between, usually went through 2 stops at least. Came in drunk. Well, the station superintendent wouldn't let him keep driving. So I says, hey, anybody around here can drive a 6-up team? My grandfather says, yeah, I can. He's 14 years old. He gets on that stage and heads for Deadwood. And I mean, they're carrying gold, they're carrying freight, they're carrying people, they're carrying expensive express. That'd be kind of like flying a 747 today. To drive a 6-up team, you should be able to make any one of those 6 horses move any direction on the next step. If there's a hole or a rock or something like that, or a rattlesnake, you can move any one of those 6 horses any direction. So it takes a lot of concentration and a lot of effort. But there were also, you can imagine with the traffic back and forth, there's always this crowd that likes to let somebody else do all the work and then they get the money. Well, that's where the outlaws come into the picture. Oh, let me see. Dunk Blackburn was one of the popular ones. And Jack Wall. I've got a couple stories about both of them. But it wasn't unusual for an outlaw to get a job at a stage station. He did that for two reasons. To find out the modus operandi, you know, how they operated and what they did. And also to kind of have an idea of when the payroll was coming through and stuff like that, so he could let his buddies know, you know. And so one of the key characters in this story did just that. He went to work at the Hack Creek Stage Station. His name was Dunk Blackburn. And Jack Bowman ran the station. My grandfather was driving through there and stopping there occasionally. So they both became acquainted with Dunk Blackburn before he turned into the outlaw. And that all figures into a kind of an interesting story. Let me see, I got a few notes here. In the summer of '77, the holdups were so bad. This is out of Agnes Wright's Spring book. Wally had one out here a while ago. But it said, this would be in October, a little bit later. Two northbound, both the north and the southbound stages were stopped by Dunk Blackburn and Jack Wall. The robbers took about $150 in cash, arms, and ammunition, jewelry and some blankets and several articles of underclothing from the 6 passengers on the down coach, which they stopped near the Cheyenne River. They informed the passengers that they were going to take the next treasure coach without fail. Well, Jack Bowman, the operator of the Hack Creek Stage Station, was a passenger on the up coach that day, and he reported after he got into Deadwood that he had been on the boot with George Chapman. Riding on the front boot is the shotgun rider and the driver, basically, when the stage was stopped. And this is his story. We were booming along at a pretty good pace when we heard the command to halt. The night was dark and we could see no one. George didn't pull up quick enough and we heard the gun locks click. They howled George to stop and make that man get down. And I recognized the voice. It was Dunk Blackburn.
Hey, I'm in the
And he
middle of
used to
something.
work
I'll
for
call
me,
back.
you know.
Bye.
So I replied, oh, no, you don't want me to get down. They come up to the coach and lit a match and inquired who he was, you know, and Dunk looked up and saw him and he laughed at Dunk and said, don't you, as he recognized him. Then the bandits pulled off their mask and passed up a flask of whiskey and wanted to know if they had any money. Now I don't know if that was the stage line carrying it or the passengers. Anyhow, if they had any money. I said, no, they don't have, but I got a little bit. Oh, no. He replied, we don't want your money. Dunk asked me what was being said in town. Well, town at that time was Cheyenne. There was no other town in between, and that's where all the news came out of, was Cheyenne. About the frequent robberies and who was getting credit for them. And when I replied that they were, Dunk said, oh, I suppose so. I told them that soldiers were on their trail, which made both Dunk and Wall laugh. They remarked, I wish they'd send up a whole company of cavalry on our trail. We could make some money out of their horses. I asked Dunk if they were mixed up with the Holman robbery, and he said no. And he said, well, George, I'll never ask you to put on the brakes again. We're going to quit this road. Business is too bad. The next one happened actually just a few weeks before this one. This is written by Malcolm Campbell, the sheriff of the area. It's in the Cheyenne, Pioneering on the Cheyenne River book. And it's, this is, I'll read sections of this in his own words, mostly quoting it. The Cheyenne Deadwood Trail of 1877 was a scene of a good many holdups and robberies. One of the most successful gangs operating on this line was composed of Wall, Blackburn, Lame Johnny, Lame Bradley, Webster, and Hartwell. In the summer of 1877, they held up a stage once when Ed Cook was the paymaster. And he was on the coach on his way to pay off the men. Before he started, Cook, realizing the danger of traveling across the country in those days, had purchased an old shotgun with a large bore, and down the bore he had stuffed the money. Okay, this is a muzzleloader shotgun that was used. Now, how many of you ever shot a muzzleloader? Anybody? Well, you see, there's one. You can't put bullets in a muzzleloader. You have to make your own bullet in the barrel. So you put in some powder, and you put in some wadding, and you put in a ball, or in this case, some buckshot, and then you put a cap on the other end, and if everything works, when you pull the trigger, it all explodes, you know. But sometimes it doesn't. And all the old pictures that you see of muzzleloaders, mountain men and stuff like that carrying a muzzleloader, they never have them in a scabbard, hanging down on the horse. They always carry the rifle in front of them with the barrel up. And you did that so that the ball wouldn't roll away from the powder, and then you get a misfire. Because if you get a misfire, how do you get the ball out of the rifle, you know? Well, there's one way, and this is what they used. You used a ramrod to push the powder and the patch and ball down in until you thought you had it solid. But if they got loose in there and you had to get the ball out, you used the other end of it, which had a corkscrew on it. And you went down in and tried to get it screwed into that ball and slowly pull it out of there. Didn't always work real well, and was kind of slow if somebody was shooting at you. So anyhow, this was the procedure of loading and unloading this rifle. And it said he purchased this old shotgun with a large bore and stuffed the money down the barrel of it. Now I did, you know, I found one $5 gold piece. A $5 gold piece slides right in a 12 gauge barrel. A dime won't. They're about the same size. A dime won't quite go down there. But they're pretty thin. A stack of $5 gold pieces, you can probably put 15 or 20 in an inch. You know, they're hardly a 16th of an inch thick. So he could have put a pretty good payroll down those barrels. And what he would have done then would have been just put in a paper patch, wadding like you would put in a shotgun, on top of each of them, pack them down in good and tight so it didn't rattle around. You know, that would, if anybody grabbed a muzzleloader and it was rattling, they would be suspicious in a hurry. So anyhow, he had the payroll in the barrel of his shotgun. When the passengers were lined up and searched, Lame Bradley, who had a grudge against Cook, took a shot at him and shot off a piece of his ear. And my granddad had a piece of his ear missing from a bullet. Before Bradley could fire again, he was stopped by Blackburn, who once remembered that Cook had befriended him at one time. As one of the gang had taken Cook's watch, Blackburn compelled them to return it. This almost caused a fight among the robbers. When the robbers searched Cook, they found very little money on him, looking at his worthless old shotgun and berating any man that would be fool enough to carry such a gun, they threw it in the bushes. When the robbers left, Cook recovered his gun with the money still in the barrel. So, now, the date on this pistol, this is like 1877. There were breech-loading weapons available at that time. So, boy, when they came out, muzzleloaders got turned old real fast. But anyway, he was carrying it and it had it in. So all he had to do when he got to the next stage station was just go down with his corkscrew and the ramrod, pull out the wadding, dump out the payroll in $5 gold pieces. So I like Malcolm Campbell's comment here. Lame Bradley, called himself the king of the road, but for once he was outwitted and threw away the money which he actually held in his hands. This same Bradley had killed a man named Powell on the Cheyenne River just before this robbery. Powell was a member of their gang, but in an argument with Bradley, he was the slowest. Bradley was the quickest on the draw. So anyhow, that sums up Malcolm Campbell's story on this one. But I think it's kind of unique to still have the weapon and know the story on it. And I did double check it to make sure the $5 gold piece would go down there. Anyhow, any other questions? Or any questions at all? Comments?
How long did your dad work on, or your grandfather work on that stage line, Ed? How long did he work on the stage line? How many years?
Well, he started to ride. He was on it as long as it lasted.
Okay.
And it kept tapering off. The last coach out of Cheyenne wasn't the end of the Cheyenne Deadwood. And the railroad through here didn't stop the coach traffic because you can't get to Blackwood on Chicago Northwestern. It had to. It wasn't until the railroad from Chadron got into the Black Hills that the rail was of any value getting to the Black Hills. So for quite a while they hauled stuff just from Lusk to the Black Hills, people and freight and everything. And as finally got to where the rails could get in, well they had a line running like from Sundance into Deadwood too for quite a while. See, the end of the railroad up there. So it.
When would you say the last stagecoach left Lusk?
Oh my! It would have been.
Last stage
The last one.
from Cheyenne, you mean?
Oh no!
Here.
See, the stage line ran for another 2
Right,
years after it
exactly.
stopped coming out of Cheyenne. They just the reason it stopped coming out of Cheyenne was because they had a railroad built to Chugwater. So they put the south end of the stage line at Chugwater for a year or two, and then another one up the line. It was another couple of years before they actually stopped making the full run through.
Ed, I'm sorry, did you tell the story about your grandfather getting a piece of his ear shot off?
Yeah.
Tell that?
Yeah. But anyhow, then actually, they kept the stage operating just kind of for local service here for several years. You know, even when you could get to the Black Hills on the rail order from Crawford. And so it didn't just die a sudden death, but it tapered off, of course.
When would you say the last one
You know,
came through?
we used to have a set of transportation tickets and stuff in here on that. And when our furnace blew a bunch of smoke a while back,
The answer to that question is in this book, but I don't have my glasses with me, so it'll take me forever to find it, but it's in here, I know it is. This is in the library, by the way, if anybody wants to read a really detailed account of the old.
Is it in the bookstore?
We don't sell them. We've got one in here that you're welcome to come in and read. This is my copy that I have at home. I bought it on the internet. I think you can still buy
this
them.
book is written by Agnes Wright Spring.
Yeah.
She was the Wyoming state historian.
Yeah, very well done and
At the time.
documented.
And
maps of all, it's got maps and all kinds of
yeah,
good
it's-
photos. And I'm sure that our library has a copy or two,
the
but I don't know the answer to that one.
the local stuff around here isn't in there that much. Most of this is out of the Cheyenne papers. But you see the Deadwood paper burned up 3 times, so there's no real good records. So most of the news in there came from the reports at Cheyenne, out of that end of it. Because Deadwood had had, what, 2 or 3 fires up there that burnt the paper supply out, and bad news like that. But the coach was still used locally, and we had a local transportation company, and those, I can't give you a date on the tickets, but I'd say probably another 10 years after the coach actually stopped making the routes.
How long would it take to get from Cheyenne to Deadwood on a stage?
It depended on who was on the coach and how much of a hurry they were in. When the boss was on the coach and he had an emergency in Deadwood, it took 40 hours. Typical was 48 or a little more. Best time ever was 40, and that was when one of the owners was headed for Deadwood in an emergency.
Were they trying to go 24 hours a day, or did they shut down for a while?
Well, there was a while when the robberies were so bad that they didn't run from Hat Creek north at night. But after that kind of settled down, yeah, it was a 24-hour deal. That was state-of-the-art transportation. They had even had telegraph along with it. So you had state-of-the-art transportation and state-of-the-art communication. Any other questions? These, this Pioneering on the Cheyenne River, if you ever get a chance to see one of those little books, it's a great book. It's got about 40, 50 stories in it. It was written about 1940. It's not in print anymore, but there's a few copies around. And Agnes Wright Springs is a good book. Now, she went from here to Colorado, and she was the Colorado State Historian. So, in the Denver Public Library, there is a section on Western history, and in it is Agnes Wright Springs collection, which happens to include a whole lot of Wyoming stuff. So the only place you can get some good pictures off of this a lot of times is the Denver Public Library and her collection. Because a lot of her private collection went with her when she went to Colorado. But they do have it pretty well preserved down there in Denver City County library in the Western History Department.
Basically, where I wanted to start. In the 1830s, Augustus Hope built some of the first saddles that resemble what we use today. A lot of those saddles weren't much more than the rawhide tree that you see here. They did have the stirrup leathers hung from them in a notch. The girth was run across the bars instead of the stirrup leathers being run across the bars. They put a little bit of leather on them, mostly for decoration, but they basically used the rawhide tree. And that was kind of the first saddle that was developed. In the 1840s, they started putting a Moncello on it, and it was a big piece of leather that covered the saddle, and they just threw it on there, right over the rawhide tree, cover up the basic old Hope saddle. It was also referred to as a Mother Hubbard style saddle. And that was phased out basically in the 1870s. They started going, Gailton, a saddle maker here in Cheyenne by the name of Gailton, he started building saddles with a half seat in, and the stirrup leathers were exposed. This right here is a half seat saddle. It has the stirrup leathers exposed in it, and the seat just runs halfway up into the bars. Your side jockeys were generally sewed on separately and then tied up here. But that is a half seat saddle. Pretty much reminiscent of that type. It had a big horn in it. They were still using the Mexican style saddles and trees. and going about things in that manner. From there, they changed to a loop seat saddle. This Miles City saddlery saddle right over here that belonged to Percival's.
This one?
Yes. It has the loop seat in it, where the stirrup leathers were exposed just up in the seat in a notch. And that was to facilitate oiling of the stirrup leathers. When they started covering them up, they covered some up, and them guys didn't like that. They liked to be able to oil the stirrup leathers when they went over the bar. And so that's the reason for that design. From that, then they went on in the modern times to cover the full seat and make the saddle that way. We have quite a few saddles in here. One of them that's kind of drawn some interest here is the one with the swastikas on it. The swastikas were very common until about 1940 and thereafter. and then they kind of lost favor. They were extremely popular. The Indians used them. They were even used back in the times of the ancient Greeks. They were a symbol that they used on coins that represented prosperity. So it's been a symbol that's been around for a long time. And it's a shame that the Nazis had to ruin it, demonize that emblem. In Scandinavia, it was known as Thor's hammer. The Pueblo Indians used it on baskets of pottery. They called it the whirling logs symbol. And it was a symbol that meant good fortune and was used quite extensively. After that, all in the 20s and the 30s, it was used a lot, especially around dude ranches. Dude ranches used the symbol. They had it on handkerchiefs, they had it on glasses, they had it on pottery, they had it on poker chips. About anything that they could sell and peddle, they put the swastika on. It was a nice continuous design, and it sold well. So that's kind of the history of that. And that saddle there was donated by Harry Baker. And I talked to Dick Baker about the saddle. He said that his dad bought the saddle. He don't know as he ever rode in it much, but when he got the saddle, he was told that it was owned by an Indian, and the Indian actually had that brand at that time. And so that was kind of the information Dick Baker gave me on that saddle. One of the most curious saddles is this little saddle right up front here. And it would have been a child's saddle and probably built for a young lady. The wide fenders on it are quilted, and generally that was done to so the young lady's skirts wouldn't become soiled against the horse. And I wish I knew all the history of that. That's amazing. That little saddle there. That's something that's probably one of the most curious treasures in here in the saddle collection.
Now, Dan, would you say that was done by a professional saddle maker, or would that have been a homemade?
Well, it could have been homemade. It could have been done by a professional saddle maker as well. It's something that would have been quick and easy for a child. And what's curious about it is they use a bar in the front that is almost identical to what they use on a Decker pack saddle today. And so that makes it just that much more curious. Some of the other saddles, we've got a couple of side saddles here, which I'm sure everybody understands the use of them. For ladies, wearing a dress or such, they can ride in that without riding astride over the saddle. This here is a lady's astride saddle. and they were also used on the old plantations back east in the southeast, and probably came from that direction. It wasn't real popular out here in the west, and it wasn't really used that much, but that's what that is. That's a ladies' astride saddle. In here we have a real good example of a McClellan saddle, military saddle. McClellan was built it was a utility. The McClellan saddle was made so that you could ride in it, you could pack on it, you could hang anything on it on a horse. They were just a utility, is what they were. And the majority of military, when they were traveling, they trotted horses. They needed to be able to travel light and fast. Okay? That saddle done that. It was very light. It didn't have a lot of weight. You could carry other things on that saddle, and troops could travel at a fast rate, cover a lot of country, and that's the reason they kept it light. That kind of brings us down to probably the biggest treasure in here, and that's this Frank Mania saddle right here. That's a beauty. That is a nice saddle. That saddle there, although it's not one of his older saddles were stamped Frank Mania, Wyoming Territory, when he started. This one here is stamped Cheyenne, Wyoming. So it would have been one of his later saddles, but it's a beauty. Frank Mania, he got his start. His uncle was Ed Gailton, and him and Sam Gallup had a saddle shop in Denver, Colorado. Frank Mania is a nephew of Ed Gailton. Ed Gailton had several branch stores throughout the country, in Nebraska, Kansas, and Wyoming, and Cheyenne here. He opened that in the shop in 1873 in Cheyenne. Frank Mania, being his nephew, came to Cheyenne to run that branch store. There were some years later that Frank bought the store out and took it over and started producing saddles under his own name. Frank's brother, Theodore, was also set up in the saddle making business. He built saddle trees in Denver, Colorado. All of the trees that are in Frank Mania's saddles were built by Theodore Mania in Denver. He used no other trees. So that's kind of the history on that.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Being unfamiliar with saddles in general, when you talk about the tree, is that wood?
Okay, that's structure underneath, and that's what I brought an example of too, because I thought maybe that question might come up. Okay, this here's a saddle tree. And this is what we use today. In fact, this one right here, that's a tree for the pageant. That's a bowling rover. That's what the pageants, when I built the pageant saddle. They're a wood tree, rawhide covered, primarily built out of pine. There'll be other woods laminated at times in the fork to add strength to it. Same with the camel on the saddle. Some of the old tools, I brought a few of them here if anybody wants to look at them. I've got tools here that are made by Gomp, spelled G-O-M-P-H. And Gomp built a lot of saddle making tools. They were in about that turn of the century era. And I still use them today. I've got that, and I've got a few stamping tools here too, if you want to take a look. The other thing, Frank Mania, he passed away in 1928. But But that saddle there is in beautiful condition. I mean, quite a saddle. It's a real jewel.
What would that saddle be worth today?
Oh, you know, in today's market, a few years, 20 years back, it would have been worth probably 8,000 to 10,000. In today's market, it's probably worth about 3,500, 4,000, somewhere in that range.
Why is the market so soft?
Just, you know, it goes in phases, and the collectability of saddles and tack. Harness that used to bring, you know, a few years back, used to bring quite a price. You couldn't hardly buy harness. And you can buy harness pretty cheap anymore. You go around some of the bigger sales and stuff, a full set of harness, you know, for draft horses, big draft horses, you can pick up for around $500. You know, things kind of come and go. You know, there's, and same with pads and saddles, you know, in what they want, what they like. You know, deepness of it, height of the candles, you know, the slick forks. This saddle right back here has got a slick fork in it. And, you know, they went out of style there around the turn of the century. So, and before.
The horn itself is wood.
No, the horn in here, that's generally a steel horn. Most all of, I don't see a wood post here. If you see a saddle, and they put a lot of them on they put a lot of them on a wade tree, that's just got a wood cap. On a wade tree, you'll see a saddle with a great big, the neck of the horn is big, and then it just flares out a little bit, and then we're a wood post now, and they are actually completely wood underneath there.
When did some of the old saddles had brass horns?
Yeah.
Turn of the century about, is that on them?
You
Or?
know, it was a fad. I've got a hyzer with a brass horn in it, with nickel-plated brass horn. And, you know, it was a fad that they went through. The trouble was they were real dangerous. If a horse would roll over, you know, come over backwards on you or stuff like that, there was a lot of guys hurt bad. They was just like a spear. You know, they was solid and sharp, and they punch a hole right in you. And they was kind of for fancy and not so much for, you know, you couldn't hardly hold a rope right, you know, unless you was tying hard and fast. You know, unless you roped in that manner, you just, you know, if you was dallying, they weren't worth the hoop.
When did the 3/4 rig, when did that start showing up? Did you?
Well, they went from the half seat, and then they went to the full seat. The only thing in between was the loop seat saddles, you know, basically. But the half seat, like this saddle here, you know, they went from that to the full seat. You know, there really wasn't so much of a 3/4 seat, you know, unless you would go back to most of these saddles. Your seat leather comes right up here to the base of the swell, to the fork. Okay, and when it goes just to there, it ends, and then they had this little small front jockey up front. And when they done that, you know, that was just the way saddles were built at that time. Today, we take and run this like this one here, and it runs clear around. It doesn't stop here, the seat leather. It runs clear around and up underneath the front ties.
Dan, what can you tell me about fiberglass trees? Yeah, is that a bad word about like plastic saddles?
You know, you get a lot of saddle makers and a lot of arguments over fiberglass trees. Some of them swear by them. I have absolutely no use for them.
What's your chief complaint?
Huh?
What's your chief complaint? What?
They're not. They're not live.
Okay.
You know, what I refer to as live, they don't have the movement and the give. Wood is very forgiving. It has a lot of give, comes right back. Fiberglass, it's too rigid. You know, I like the tree and the saddle to be able to move. A lot of old saddles, when you take them apart, when you build a saddle, you put a strainer in it. It's a metal piece, a galvanized metal piece that goes in. And basically, is the foundation that your seat's built on, that your ground seat's built on. When you put that metal strainer in there, and you tack it all down around the sides, it's in there pretty solid. And it gives a real good foundation for your saddle. I've taken apart a lot of really old saddles, and those metal strainers will be broken into several pieces. And that just goes to show the amount of movement that's in that wood tree. And a wood fiberglass covered tree, a wood and rawhide covered tree, you've got two living things, basically, your rawhide and your wood, and they work good together. It's a combination I don't think can be beat.
Another question, Dan, I see in different catalogs, you know, with saddles, they tell about the different riggings, which to me is the placement of your cinch strap. What's the different, or why are there different ones, different placements?
You know, most of that is there's, like a 3/4 to 7/8 is really pretty general. Puts it about right. A lot of the older saddles that were single rig were set back farther. They were set back to, either full or center fire, or 5/8 somewhere in there, to hold that saddle more in the middle of the horse. You kind of build it to what fits generally, and go from there. If somebody wants it specialized beyond that point, you can go this or that. They also make a rigging plate, which I've started using in some saddles. Works real nice, and it's a wider plate, and it has a post in the center, and it gives you 3 different settings.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah, and you can go from 7/8 on back, and rig that saddle that way, and that will run nice.
And when would you say that they started doing like the double cinch thing?
Oh, probably in the 20s. It happened fairly early. Maybe earlier than that. There might be some saddles. You go back and you look at a lot of the older saddles. Look at the old Charlie Russell paintings. Go back and look at them old drawings, Frederick Remington and those guys, and see if you can ever find a back cinch or a breast collar on a horse. It just didn't exist, basically, at that time. And
Well, do you think the reason they went to the second was this more along the lines of roping and holding the critter? Was that the idea, that not to let the saddle tip?
I think them old timers did as much more roping than we done. And growing up where I grew up in the mountains in Colorado. And believe me, you did not use a breast collar or a back cinch. Absolutely not. We was up there in high country, steep country, bad country. You didn't use it. One main reason. That's something to run a limb under. If you run a limb under a breast collar or a back cinch, you're in a world of hurt, and you're in a big wreck. So, and then we tried to keep saddles as light as we could, also. You know, we were, where our headquarters was 8,500 feet, and we moved up from there. We went to Timberline. So, we tried to keep saddles as light as we could also.
Okay, along the lines of weight, the one up there that you said is a prize saddle. Yeah, for its day. That compared to a saddle you'd make today, equivalent kind of to it, how do they compare in weight?
Well, they compare pretty good. It's fairly heavy, but not bad. You know, the saddle, it's built out a little bit lighter leather. A lot of them older cowboys wanted saddles built out of lighter leather. Some of the stuff they use today is way out of range as far as I'm concerned as a saddle maker. The leather we have today is extremely good quality. I hate to build a saddle out any heavier than 9.5 ounce leather. Most of it today is built out of anywhere from 13 to 16 ounce leather.
Now, what's that like per square foot?
Thickness.
Oh, thick.
The thickness of the
Oh.
leather. And that's, you know, just a measurement of thickness when they refer to ounces of leather.
I noticed that you have, and I came in a little late, so you may have already talked about it, but I noticed that every one of these saddles are high backs.
Yeah, pretty much.
And why is that? Because in the movies when you see them, because we watch a lot of old movies.
Oh, yes.
There's a lot of the lower back ones, and when I got my first saddle, I wanted a high back because I thought it was more comfortable. But I see that they must have had a lot of high backs back then.
Age and what they were using at that time. And of course, this is a museum, so they got older saddles.
Yeah, which surprised me that the high backs were way back then for some reason. I don't know
Yeah,
why.
you know, and it's what they used. It's what I ride in today. I think it's more comfortable. I can.
But at the time of these saddles,
Yeah.
more people rode broncs
Yeah.
than we do today.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
You
you
need
need
to feel
that
safe in
back
the saddle.
to help keep you there.
Yeah. You need a deeper saddle.
Yep.
Dan, you were telling that gentleman, I'm not sure he was, and I earlier, would you explain what you explained about the bear trap saddle?
Oh, well, bear trap basically, this saddle over here with the swells on the fork are swept back. A bear trap generally, and it'd have larger swells, more like this saddle, where they protrude. And when those came back, a lot of them guys used those to ride broncs. And the worst trouble was, is it was basically a bear trap. Once you were caught in a bear trap, you were caught. And you couldn't get out of it. So if you got in a real wreck with the horse, you were stuck with it.
Like flipped over, backwards especially.
Yeah. They were dangerous.
But you didn't fall out of them.
But you didn't fall out of it. You couldn't fall out of it. Yeah. Any other questions?
Well, once again, I'm late again.
No problem.
Can you go a little bit on the horns? There's different size of horns. There's the bigger ones, the fatter ones. I know the Mexicans have the big fat
Yeah,
ones.
you know, and this was kind of a typical Mexican style.
Big fat ones.
You know, a big horn cap like that.
Depends on-
The others, you know, basically, it was the preference of the cowboy. You know, a lot of times when they ordered a saddle, it was what they wanted. And it still is today. The cap size, the height, everything. I can order them without any variation. It's-
So basically like rovers have different.
What's that?
What's the advantage of a white cap?
Oh,
More to hold on?
easier to lean.
Elbow rest.
It was the way they started making them. The original old Hope saddles in the 1830s, made down there in southern Texas. They were made with those big horns, with that big Mexican style horn. That Hope saddle was. And so it was basically, you know, you start with one design and you work your way forward.
I don't see any of the stirrups with the leather guard on the front. When I started
Oh,
riding,
the Tapaderos.
I rode a child's saddle and it had the Tapadero.
Yeah. Tapaderos on a saddle,
Kept your foot from going through.
that kept your foot from going through, especially a child saddle. It's really not a bad idea on a young child to have them small Tapaderos on a saddle, you know. If they do, they keep them from getting their foot clear through them. They also warmth in the winter time.
Warmer in the winter.
Yeah, and they use them for that. Down there in Texas and that type of country, with the cactus and all that, they use them to protect their feet from the cactus.
I don't know if anyone has ever seen any of Dan's work, but like you said, he's done the Legend Rawhide saddle for several years, haven't you? And this man does beautiful work, and it's not just saddles, he does all kinds of leather work.
So what is your time limit, Dan, on making a saddle? How long does it take you?
I have no idea.
Really? So you probably do a lot at one time?
That's usually the first question people ask me.
Yeah?
How long does it take you to build one? And I have not a clue. I can't see it.
Of course, if you gave up your day job, running the ranch, you'd be able to spend more time. Yeah.
So if someone came up to you in June and said, you know, I'd like to have you make a saddle for my wife by Christmas.
It's that ball trying to get out.
Oh, I could do it, it'd be pretty impressive.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I can imagine.
Besides the saddle for the pageant, I hate to put a timeline on building the saddle for somebody, you know. I can give them a general idea when I'll have it done, but other than that, it's gonna be when I get it done.
Do they come up to you and say, I want it this way, or do they only trust you to do?
And that's, you know, that's the reason they come to the saddle maker. You know, otherwise they go to the store and buy one off the shelf.
Well, another question I have is, a lot of people I've heard through my years of horses, they like their saddle made for their horse. Because some saddles sit high, some sit low. Do you have people doing that for you, or?
No.
Because I find my saddles don't fit a lot of my horses. Like, you know, it's good for one, but it doesn't fit on the other one because of the withers or something, I don't know.
A basic tree like that, with the gullet whip and everything that's in it, it should fit without any horse. Most of your older saddles, they have a narrower gullet width. And the gullet width is a measurement where the fork meets the bar,
Yeah.
right here. And that gullet width, in one of your older saddles, you had horses at that time that were thinner, lighter horses. Okay? Our horses have changed somewhat. Not that much though. We went to a little bit wider gullet. The gullet width has increased, a half to 3/4 of an inch from horses back in this era to horses today. You get much wider than that, or I guess what I hate to see, you know, really a lot of times a horse, people get to padding them too much. You should, a well-made saddle, all you need is a blanket. Throw one blanket on that horse. Oh.
Yeah, because I see some with like 2 pads.
Yeah,
Their saddle.
yeah, and, you know, you get into saddles that don't have enough rock in the bar, they don't have enough curve here, that's the rock. They're too flat. So, you know, you get into a lot of store-made saddles, and they run them through so quick, they're using cheaper trees, different things. You might need a little bit more padding, but for every pad that you put underneath the saddle, you increase the size of that horse. So if you're doing that, actually, you're pinching that horse by padding. And a well-made saddle, you had to have to use more than one blanket. One good wool blanket underneath the saddle. should be clean.
Dan, a lot of these saddles that you buy at the store, are they what I would call mass produced?
Yeah.
I saw them made on how it's made.
Yeah. Yeah,
They
they're-
make a saddle in 4 hours.
Yeah. And there's a lot of difference in it.
Oh, I'm sure.
When I take them apart to work on them, you find, you know.
You see why it took them only 4 hours.
Yeah.
You take one of those like trees, and if you hook onto a good critter, you can pull the horn right out of it.
Oh.
Well, and another thing, you know, I run into trees, I've got a saddle that I'm working on for somebody right now. I just need to clean up, kind of put back together, so they bought the saddle and they just wanted it cleaned up and put back together a little bit so they could return it. And it's an older made saddle, but the tree is actually covered with cheesecloth. They use cheesecloth and a fiberglass plastic mix over it. And that's what's on, you know, there isn't anything wrong with it.
Question on the fiberglass tree. Does it get more brittle as it gets older?
That would be my theory. I know personally how fiberglass breaks down.
I haven't had any association with a fiberglass tree, but with fiberglass pipe,
Yeah,
I don't care if it's underground or where it's at, it's gonna get old and brittle.
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. You know, and there's even a guy right now, building trees, and instead of covering them with rawhide, he's covering them with Kevlar. Now, the only thing I can figure is if your pistol goes off, and shoots back in the saddle, and shoot your horse. I don't know, it's the only thing I can figure. But